The two gunmen responsible for 7 Belfast murders in 6 years are at the center of a bitter dissident Republican fallout that has threatened to erupt into violence. The killers belong to what was seen as the Reilly faction of Óglaigh, aka O.N.H, the West Belfast gang who killed drug dealers Jim J.D. Donegan, Sean Fox, Warren Crossan, Crossan's enforcer Mark Hall, Lurgan criminal Kevin Conway, as well as one-time O.N.H members Kieran Wylie and Danny McClean. Reilly, who served a recent jail sentence for O.N.H membership, led one faction which wanted to maintain the group's 2018 ceasefire against the British state. On the other side were those loyal to Tony McDonnell, a former new IRA man who wants to break the O.N.H ceasefire and resume attacks on security forces. But an image of the Reilly faction, sent to the Belfast Telegraph in September 2024, is said to have infuriated McDonnell, as the two O.N.H gunmen are featured prominently and sending a clear message: attack us at your own risk. But instead of standing down, the McDonnell faction organized their own photo claiming the O.N.H name, and in a statement to the Irish News, said Reilly was under the threat of death at the very first opportunity. The row between Reilly and McDonnell had been growing for months. After it was rumored Reilly agreed to work on a government-backed peace project through O.N.H's political wing, the Republican Network for Unity, aka RNU. This prompted McDonnell, who was once jailed for collecting information on security services, to walk away with his more senior ex-provisional IRA associates. But while Reilly denied the allegations, he had no intentions of resuming an O.N.H military campaign. That's because under Reilly's leadership, O.N.H has gotten rich from taxing drug dealers throughout West Belfast, and until McDonnell, that leadership had gone unchallenged. And while there have been no attacks thus far, when considering the violent history of O.N.H, it could only be a matter of time. In 1998, Northern Ireland had both a peace agreement and the single worst atrocity of the Troubles. In August of that year, the anti-peace process Real IRA attracted international condemnation after it exploded a 500-pound car bomb in the town of Omagh, killing 29 men, women, and children. The Omagh bomb was a severe blow to the dissident Republican campaign and would inspire a joint operation between the FBI and MI5 that would lead to Real IRA leader Michael McKevitt being jailed for 20 years. A subsequent lack of leadership within the Real IRA would lead to splitting ideologies. And in 2008, Real IRA co-founder Seamus "Shay" McGran would break away and form what would become known as Óglaigh.
A reckless and cowardly attempt to kill. That's how police are describing the latest attack by dissident Republicans on their officers.
Shots were fired at them in West Belfast. It's believed Óglaigh were responsible.
And O.N.H quickly became the most active dissident Republican group in Northern Ireland, setting out to murder and maim police officers, soldiers, and civilians through shootings, pipe bombs, grenade attacks, and booby-trap car bombs. But O.N.H did not confine itself to military and police targets, as they terrorized Republican areas in West and North Belfast, administering vigilante justice through extortion, exile, beatings, and shootings. And while Southerner Shay McGran was the founder-in-chief of O.N.H, by the 2010s, its power base was shifting to West Belfast under local boss Reilly, who served a 5-year prison sentence for his role in a continuity IRA gun attack on a West Belfast police station in 1999. But by 2011, the socialist Reilly had switched allegiances and was elected chairman of the Republican Network for Unity, the party closely linked to O.N.H, while being fully employed by Conflict Resolution Services Ireland, a registered West Belfast charity that provided mediation services for those under O.N.H threat. So to be clear, Reilly was not just the leader of Belfast O.N.H. He was the head of its political wing, and a charity worker that negotiated with people who owed him money. But at Reilly's right hand was his cousin and fellow socialist Sean O'Reilly, an RNU activist who served as ONH's official point of contact with Conflict Resolution Services Ireland. And should anything ever happen to Carl, Sean O'Reilly would step up. But in 2012, O'Reilly was jailed for 30 months for his role in a botched ONH shooting, leaving cousin Carl without his most trusted confidant. And Carl Reilly liked to talk. Between 2014 and 2015, Carl Reilly was one of 3 ONH men, secretly recorded by Irish police at hotel meetings in County Louth. Reilly and his associates spoke openly about past missions and future campaigns, with Reilly at one point saying, "I'm the most fucking wanted man in Óglaigh in the north. Forgive me if I don't want to talk myself into prison." But that's exactly what he did. Following Reilly's arrest in October 2015, he was charged with directing terrorism and membership of ONH. And after being denied bail, Reilly was transferred onto the Republican wing of Maghaberry Prison. ONH was now a snake without its head. Chief Shay McGran had also been jailed for directing terrorism in 2015, while dairy boss Tony Taylor was also behind bars for violating his post-Good Friday Agreement early release. But this sudden, unexpected gap in leadership allowed for a more moderate voice to take control of ONH. ONH's military campaign was going nowhere. After initial success in the early years, support for the group had dwindled, even amongst its own members. And while they were once the new kids on the block, they were not anymore.
This latest attack came on the very day when dissident groups, including RAD and the Real IRA, announced they would be joining together to form a new IRA. But it's understood Óglaigh are not part of that faction.
Following a merger between the Real IRA, Republican Action Against Drugs, and independent East Tyrone dissidents, the new IRA was founded in the summer of 2012. A year that saw dissident Republican prisoners engaged in dirty protest inside Maghaberry Prison. RNU would lead multiple demonstrations in support of the prisoners, but the new IRA went a step further, murdering prison officer David Black as he drove to work in November 2012. In the years that followed, the new IRA became the dominant dissident grouping in Northern Ireland and the Republic, murdering a second prison officer, Adrian Ismay, in 2016, and taking over crime rackets previously controlled by ONH. In January 2018, more than 2 years after he was arrested, Carl Reilly was bailed as he continued to await trial. But the ONH that waited for him looked very different than when he went in. The group had not launched an attack on security services for 18 months, and no longer had an appetite for a war they weren't going to win. It was a predicament Carl Reilly did not endorse, but he had been gone for 2 years, and his influence had waned. On the 22nd of January 2018, ONH announced a ceasefire against the British state, while ominously warning that it would continue to protect its membership and base, a promise that would come to fruition later that year.
What you will observe is the gunman walks down to the pedestrian crossing behind me. He then walks across the road in the company of what I believe is primary school children and shoots Mr. Jim Donegan. And I believe that he has done this before.
On the afternoon of December 4th, 2018, an unmasked gunman murdered drug dealer Jim J.D. Donegan as he waited to pick up his son from school off the Glen Road in West Belfast before disappearing on foot into the nearby Lenadoon estate. The public execution was a joint operation between ONH and the Irish National Liberation Army, aka the INLA, who were both extorting Donegan for the right to sell drugs. But the flashy Donegan had refused to pay the group's most recent demands, and his death was a daytime display of what would happen to other dealers if they did the same. But while ONH had a sharpshooter within its ranks, The aim of the new IRA had suddenly gotten wobbly. Months later, on the 19th of April, 2019, the new IRA's Dairy Brigade shot dead 29-year-old journalist Lyra McKee while she watched a riot behind police lines. And while said to have been an accident, the murder brought international condemnation, not seen since the Omagh bomb, and resulted in an MI5-led operation that put 9 alleged members of the new IRA's Army Council behind bars on the evidence of double agent Dennis McFadden. The new IRA had gotten too big and become sloppy with who they let into their ranks, while O.N.H was now looking stronger than it had in years, following the murder of Jim Donegan. And when it came to suspected double agents, O.N.H was equally as ruthless.
Kieran Wylie was at home last night just before 10 p.m. when 2 gunmen attacked him. He was shot several times at close range. He died at the scene.
Shortly after 10 p.m. on Sunday, May 17th, 2020, 2 gunmen burst into the West Belfast home of 57-year-old Kieran Wylie and shot him dead in front of his 2 daughters before escaping on foot into the Lenadoon estate. Wylie had been a prominent member of O.N.H, but had recently been accused of betraying an arms dump to police and providing cops with details that led to a senior figure within O.N.H being jailed. Wylie fiercely denied the allegations against him, and in a final act of defiance, painted graffiti branding his main accuser within O.N.H a tout, a reckless move that cost him his life. Shooting Kieran Wylie in front of his daughters was a cold, brutal move by O.N.H, who had been rejuvenated since their so-called ceasefire. It was an unexpected turn of events, perfectly timed with the decline of the new IRA, who by now had all but vanished from Belfast. But more importantly, O.N.H had a killing machine at its beck and call, and 1 month later, that machine would strike again.
Police say Warren Crossan was known to them, and while they won't confirm a motive for his murder, they say they can't rule out links to dissident Republican activity or organised crime.
On the afternoon of Sunday, June 28, 2020, 28-year-old cocaine kingpin Warren Crossan got out of a friend's car to visit his mom in the St. James area of West Belfast. That's when Crossan saw 2 gunmen lying in wait and ran as fast as he could while pleading for his life. But his fate was sealed, as the gunmen shot Crossan 6 times, leaving him to die in the street as they disappeared into the area. But while Crossan was a big-time drug dealer, that's not what killed him. Crossan's father was former Continuity IRA chief Tommy Crossan, who was shot dead by dissident Republicans in 2014. And as Warren grew older, he grew vengeful, vowing to kill the men who murdered his dad. And while Tommy Crossan's death was never claimed by any group, it's fair to say O.N.H likely played a role. But if that wasn't enough, Warren Crossan had also been suspected of supplying the car used in the 2020 Belfast murder of Dublin criminal Robbie Lawler, an act of deception that brought the murder of Ireland's most notorious gangster to the doorstep of Republican Ardoyne in North Belfast.
It's been 18 months since I lost my daddy. It helps you come to terms with what happened. It's wrong what happened, but it helps you come to terms with it. If that gunman can go take my daddy's life and to take somebody else's, then they don't have a conscience, they don't have emotions. How do they sleep at night knowing that they've took multiple people's lives? That's something you could never deal with.
The following year, on the night of February 2nd, 2021, 54-year-old Danny McClean was shot dead as he sat in his car outside a pub in North Belfast. McClean, a one-time O.N.H enforcer and ally of Kieran Wylie, had served 16 months on the dissident wing of Maghaberry Prison in 2019 after he was convicted of abducting and torturing a suspected drug dealer. But during his trial, it became public that McClean had spent 5 years in the British Army decades earlier. So upon his release, graffiti appeared around West Belfast, calling McClean a tout and threatening his life. So, fearing that he could be killed, McClean moved to North Belfast, armed himself with a handgun, and collected the addresses of leading ONH members, including Carl Reilly. However, ONH leaders intent on revenge lured McClean to a meeting under the guise of a negotiation. But upon arrival, Danny McClean was shot dead.
We have commenced a murder investigation following the brutal shooting of Mark Hall yesterday afternoon. These gunmen do not think about the impact attacks like this have on the wider community, who are rightfully shocked and fearful.
Later that year, on December 18, 2021, 31-year-old Mark Hall was shot dead inside his mom's St. James home, one street away from where his close friend Warren Crossan also lost his life. Just after 4:30 p.m., Hall's sister was returning from a local shop when she saw two masked gunmen approaching the family home. Hall's sister bravely tried to get in the way of the men, but the gunmen fended her off and fired 7 extremely precise shots through the living room window, killing Hall sitting in a chair, surrounded by his family. And as the gunmen ran off, one of them turned around and fired at Hall's sister. Except this time, something happened that hadn't happened before. He missed, with the bullet just passing through the sister's handbag. Hall, a Belfast native who lived in Drogheda, was also Warren Crossan's gangland enforcer, and his death warrant was signed the day Crossan died, as Hall let it be known he intended to avenge the death of his criminal friend. But, like Crossan, Hall's thirst for vengeance cost him his life, as he died at the hands of the same 2 gunmen, under nearly the exact same circumstances. Months later, on Easter Sunday, 2022, the Republican Network for Unity organized a commemoration event at Milltown Cemetery in West Belfast, where a masked member of ONH took to the microphone and delivered a speech. In the speech, the masked man threatened loyalists if nationalists or Republicans were attacked as part of the ongoing Northern Ireland Protocol protests, and confirmed ONH had taken lethal action against former members and drug dealers.
Over the past number of years, we have reorganised, restructured and rearmed. Sadly, a small number of people thought they could thwart that regrowth. Some were acting out of ego, some were acting as British agents. We use lethal force to show them and others that we will not be usurped by anyone. We vow to protect our communities from the scourge of hard drugs, and we have taken lethal force also against the dealers of death. Victory to Óglaigh and hÉireann. Victory to the people of Ireland. Truckly Ireland.
For the first time, Óglaigh and hÉireann was acknowledging its murderous streak. And that streak wasn't done yet. Later that year, on the afternoon of Sunday, October 2nd, 2 masked gunmen calmly walked into the Donegal Celtic social club in West Belfast and shot dead drug dealer Sean Fox with 20 bullets in 21 seconds while he watched football with at least one of his children. The 2 gunmen then ran out, hopped on bikes, and disappeared into the Lenadune estate. Sean Fox was a close friend of Jim Donegan, and when Donegan was killed, Fox took over his drugs empire. And like Donegan, Fox was a flash criminal who enjoyed the lavish lifestyle. But also like Donegan, Fox's extortion payments were not reaching ONH. But given the fact that Fox was openly drinking in West Belfast, he likely didn't know that, because rumors soon surfaced that Fox had in fact been paying his extortion money on time. It just wasn't being handed over by his ONH intermediary. Police would later confirm the gun used to kill Mark Hall was the same gun used to kill Sean Fox. who is the 6th person to be murdered by ONH since their 2018 ceasefire, and since Carl Reilly was granted bail. By 2023, Reilly had been on bail for 6 years as he continued to await trial for his 2015 arrest. And in that time, he had taken back control of ONH by embracing its so-called ceasefire strategy, focusing instead on taxing drug dealers, punishing informers, and getting rich. In August of that year, Reilly and McDonnell were pictured shaking hands following a meeting about a large police data leak. McDonnell, who saw his home raided in the aftermath of Warren Crossan's murder, had become one of Reilly's closest associates. The image of Reilly and McDonnell's handshake looked like a movement reinvigorated, but behind the scenes, the two men had grown apart, with Reilly now fully supporting the ceasefire and McDonnell wanting to end it. But earlier that year, Reilly pled guilty to ONH membership from his 2015 arrest. But due to time served, Reilly only had a few months left. And in December 2023, he returned to Maghaberry Prison, leaving Tony McDonnell in charge of ONH. But while Reilly was behind bars, the gunmen of ONH continued to stay one step ahead of the police.
This isn't about what Kevin may or may not have been linked to. This is about trying to find his killers, and certainly any incidents linked to Kevin would form part of the ongoing police investigation and be looked at as a line of inquiry.
Just after 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday, January 9th, 2024, 26-year-old Kevin Conway was shot to death inside the flat where he was staying deep within West Belfast. Conway, an enforcer for County Armagh crime gang, The Firm, was staying in the Ross Nareen Park area as part of his bail conditions for the murder of Shane Whitla, who was gunned down in Lurgan 1 year earlier. Minutes after Conway messaged his partner that he was relaxing at home, two gunmen burst into the flat and fired at him with a shotgun and pistol, killing the defenseless Conway and making off on foot into the Lenadoon estate, bearing all hallmarks of previous ONH hits. Weeks later, 53-year-old Fergal Kane and 27-year-old Aidan O'Keefe were charged with the murder after their cars were seen traveling to and from the scene of the crime, allegedly dropping the shooters off at Conway's flat. And while Kane was eventually granted bail, O'Keefe was accepted onto the dissident wing of Maghaberry Prison. Reasons for Conway's murder have been disputed, with one theory being that it was a paid hit by the firm, who feared Conway would give evidence in Shane Whitla's murder trial, while others believe that Conway was targeted by ONH to send a clear message that West Belfast will not be some criminal dumping ground.
I suppose people become numb. People they don't see any action being taken. They don't see anyone brought to justice, anyone put in jail over these crimes. So I suppose people maybe perhaps are a little bit cynical and say, nothing will be done as usual.
In March 2024, Carl Reilly came home after 3 months behind bars. And while the dissident chief celebrated with family and friends, the PSNI were now monitoring his every move, and Tony McDonnell had had enough. Rumors had circulated that while inside, Carl Reilly agreed to accept British government peace funding on behalf of RNU, an act of betrayal for any right-minded dissident Republican. While Reilly denied the allegations, McDonnell and around 20 men broke away in the months after Reilly's release, severing all ties with the Republican Network for Unity, while claiming to be the true bearers of the ONH name. What was once a strong friendship had become a bitter feud. And after months of heated exchanges, defaced murals, and photo ops, the police finally stepped in. In October 2024, Tony McDonnell was charged with arranging the Easter 2022 show of strength at Milltown Cemetery. But McDonnell, who denied involvement, complained bitterly to friends that he'd been the victim of an MI5 setup, believing that spooks wanted him off the streets because his ONH faction threatened to end the ceasefire. And the truth is, he was probably right. But it didn't matter. In fact, it only garnered McDonnell more support within ONH. Because as 2024 came to a close, it was reported the McDonnell faction surpassed Reilly's as the bigger of the two. The highly coincidental charges against Tony McDonnell had the opposite of their intended effect, with the case only furthering McDonnell's reputation as a Republican at war with the British state, and making Carl Reilly look like the police's choice to run ONH. And so the end of one era marks the beginning of another. And with McDonnell dissolving all ties with RNU, the future of ONH is anyone's guess. But ceasefire or not, in Catholic housing estates throughout West and North Belfast, ONH are simply the men you don't speak about and never cross. Sean Fox was murdered in the middle of a pub, watching the Manchester Derby, and no one saw a thing. Just like no one bothered to even look out their window when Warren Crossan was shot dead in the street on a Sunday afternoon in June. Because the truth is, you would be a fool to do anything else. ONH are hands down the most violent paramilitary gang in Northern Ireland, taking 7 lives in 6 years, shooting dozens more, and extorting anyone making money on their turf. Because when those men come knocking on your door, you better answer. And when they tell you about the monthly payments, you pay them on time. And when those payments go up, you don't ask questions. Because if those men decide your money is no longer good, there is no one who can protect you.